So I've been reading a very interesting book, and I'm still picking my way through it. So I haven't finished it. Called "The User Illusion" by a Danish science journalist by the name, which I'm about to butcher. So my sincere apologies. Tor Nielatranders. I think I nailed that. Um, and he looks at the science of the physics and the maths research that has been going on for the last 150 years or so into the nature of consciousness and trying to understand it and to measure it from a scientific perspective, from the position of the hard sciences of maths and physics. And the lens that I want to explore some of this really interesting text, and I do encourage you to check it out if you want to. It can be a little bit heavy to start with. It was for me, because I'm not massively sciencey based, particularly in the fields of physics and maths, I'm afraid to say. But he does try and make it as accessible as possible. But there's lots of very interesting realizations in there from these fields and the research that's been done through the decades on this. And the thing that I want to sort of focus on, the theme of today, is the fact that our communication is mostly unsaid. And this comes from the fact that we take in, and the receptors of our body, the sensory receptors, our sight, our ears, our skin, our nose, etc., our taste buds, are receiving in total in the region of 11 million bits of information every second. 11 million bits, which is a fairly massive amount. The world's a big place. There's lots going on, even in this little space that I'm sat in, staring at a camera, talking to you. There is 11 million bits of data, more or less, give or take, being received into the sensors, the sensory organs, the nerves of my body, and being fired up into my brain. The really interesting thing is that our consciousness, our active, focused attention, our awareness of being aware, can only process somewhere in the region of 10 bits per second. So that's a million times less data being processed in our active consciousness than is going on around us. That's a pretty weighty conclusion. And it's been repeated through numerous scientific experiments across the decades, and appears to be at the moment, as far as science goes, because science is always being updated, right? It is the field of exploration. And a theory only stands as long as it is successfully tested, until something else supersedes it. So this is the position here and now, to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, so that's a massive difference between all the data that's around us, all the data that's actually coming into us, and then the data that's actually being processed by our conscious mind, the data that we can actually focus on being aware of consciously, directly aware of. So what does this mean for our communication? Well, it means that actually what's happening is that information is essentially discarding everything that we know or we think we know. So what happens is, when we find something that we are confident of, and this is typically all subconsciously happening, right? This is not a conscious process, but we disregard the known. So when we're describing a situation to each other, and I think for my preamble, if you saw it on social media, I used the example of describing a cow in a field. So if I say to you, I have just seen a cow in a field, then you will imagine a cow and you will imagine a field, but you won't imagine my cow in my field. And I won't take the trouble to explain to you what a cow is, because I will assume as a known that you already know what a cow is, and that our understanding of a cow is more or less the same. And the same with the field. I will assume that you understand what a field is, so I won't need to describe what a field is, and I probably won't go into much detail, if any at all, about what's in the field or what it looks like. But what will happen in my mind and in the mind of the person that I'm communicating with is that all these other thought processes will kick in and imagine that field. So repopulate missing information that's deemed to be sufficiently important. We don't like gaps, right? If I tell you I'm moving house, you might have never seen my house and you won't know where I'm moving to, but you will automatically imagine some kind of experience of where I live now, and you will imagine the experience of where I might be living in the future. And our minds do this all the time. And this is really important to realize. And it might sound, and this is always the way of these things, right? They sound obvious and in a sense intuitive. And you, well, duh, obviously I don't know what your house looks like, and my brain creates a picture, but we don't behave or act typically like that's going on. What we imagine, we allow to be real to us, right? We let that become our reality. We let that become our definition of the cow, of the field, of the house, and also of our relationships, our definition of each other, our definition of what we're communicating to each other. And it's obviously impossible to have a conversation, or very difficult. And I suppose this has been explored with podcasts and long podcasts with people like Jocko Willink and Joe Rogan, who regularly do 2.5, 3 hour conversations with people, so that we can actually, as best as possible, really understand people's perspectives and what's going on. But actually, most of our time, most of our lives, we're having very brief conversations with people. In the professional space, we probably have scant minutes to understand an issue, to translate an issue to each other, to move forward with something. We don't have 3 hours to explore every incident. And also in our personal lives, when we are communicating with each other, the time spent is often a fraction of what might be optimal. And we don't necessarily want to be transcribing every aspect of reality to each other, but sometimes it's far more important that we are explaining what's going on. And when our communications break down, when our relationships break down, then invariably a inadequate communication style is to blame. And I think a lot of our mental health problems, issues, are to do with our inability to express what we're feeling inside to the outside world in a manner that can be understood. And it sounds really easy. And again, you think, well, it's obvious. I just need to tell people how I'm feeling. But actually, that in itself is really complicated. And actually explaining how we're feeling, and possibly even getting to the why, how we're feeling, that's another layer of the onion of complication here, is far more difficult than you realize. Think about how many conversations you've really had that were difficult but focused on moving a relationship forward. Really think about that, because most of the time we get frustrated, we get overly emotional, we feel that we can't express ourselves or that we're not being understood. And sometimes that's because the other person isn't interested, and that's a separate problem. But all being equal, if you've got someone who would, in an ideal world, like to have a more effective relationship with you, then being heard, being able to articulate yourself. Yeah, it's very appropriate fumble over that word there. Articulate yourself in a way in which people can understand you is crucial. And that's where this understanding of all the information we drop becomes far more important, because we do have this incredible tendency to assume that other people are mind readers, and that we can read other people's minds. And seldom is that the case. We don't know what everyone else is thinking, and they don't know what we're thinking.